Welcome, Beth, and everybody who's watching Beth and I have this conversation. Beth is a secondary school teacher at Repton in Derbyshire. And Beth, you've just finished a few months ago
Yep.
your Masters in Learning and Teaching that you were doing at Oxford as part of the Masters Scholarship Programme at Culham St Gabriel's, and it was all focused around Oracy.
Yep.
And that's why we're having this chat today. So, what about when you are thinking about Oracy and Oracy in RE, Beth? What is it that you mean?
Oracy more generally, is to do with how students are able to kind of speak, explain themselves, articulate arguments. I came into it through doing debating at university, and for a while they were sort of two separate things that, never the two shall meet. Um, but the more my classroom practice kind of developed, the more I realised that that's also something that isn't just a co-curricular provision that a certain number of students opt into, but instead something that sits kind of very firmly in what a lot of us do in the classroom, from, think, pair, share, right up to some more kind of involved debates, is getting students to talk and to explain things and also to listen to each other. I think very often we hear, we're talking about, oral language skills, and we think, right, talk. But actually, as much of that is about listening, taking things in and responding, and kind of the dialogue that you can build up. I don't know why I'm holding a pen. The dialogue that you can build up, rather than just, you need to be on receive as much as you are on transmit.
So that's Oracy generally, and taking it in specifically to RE.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting about the placement of RE in this conversation is that, obviously, for most of human history, most knowledge was actually transmitted orally, because most people couldn't read, couldn't write. And it was actually originally, we know about the kind of the history of church schools and stuff. It was, you teach the poor children to read because then they can at least read the Bible, and won't that be nice? But actually, the original core of so much of what we do is in the spoken word. I teach my sixth one was about Plato and Aristotle, and so much of that was, oral traditions. We doing Judaism, we're year nines at the moment, and we're talking about how long it took for these things to be written down. And actually, I think the role of talk in so much of what we do, and the tradition of what we do, is really important to not lose sight of. Um, as well as that, I think that, I think it's quite difficult to do philosophy without doing the argument as well. I can tell you what a philosopher argued, but actually, if you want to do philosophy yourself, you need to talk to each other, and you need to argue through multiple sides. And that's what I try and get, my A-level students to do. But actually, I have to train them from much younger and build that skill set up, because it's not something that they necessarily have. And I think we are very well placed as a subject to develop that skill, because I think it is so central to kind of what we are actually doing on a day-to-day basis.
I think you started to answer this next.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. So why do you think you started to tell us why you think it's important to teach and use oracy skills in RE? Um, are there any specific RE subject disciplinary approaches to oracy? So things we're doing in RE that we wouldn't find in other areas. So you've talked very much about philosophy. Is there more?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot in the realm of ethics as well. So the research project that I did was looking specifically at the AQA GCSE. And I think we are, obviously, you can use debate and oracy based approaches in lots of different subjects. But what I think is fantastic for us is that the debates and conversations that we have actually transcend that classroom context. I don't know many people who have had real life over the table conversations about interpretations of historical events or whatever. But I had to give up an entire A-level lesson earlier this year to watching the live debate in Parliament on the legalisation of assisted dying. The conversations that our students are having are real life implications outside of the classroom. And we do that all the time. We bring in those examples. And I think that's something that we have that is a real kind of gift as a subject, I guess, that those conversations are happening all around us and actually they can tap into that. The other thing which I've started using, which I think is really interesting, St Andrews do it's not really a debate competition, but they do this format called the Ethics Cup, where it's not about necessarily winning an argument. It's about having a good ethical conversation, whatever conclusion you reach at the end of that. And I think that kind of reflects the role of ethical discussion that we can really use as a subject from whatever perspective we want to do. You know, we can have that conversation from religious perspectives, we can have it from secular perspectives, but I think that's something, again, where we have the ability to have real current conversations with students that, you know, can really help engage them.
And is very relevant for the world
Yeah,
that they live in and the world they're going to go out into and work as
yeah,
well. Being able to have those conversations where people have different viewpoints.
yeah,
Um, Probably not many of them are going to end up in Parliament, but those conversations happen at the hairdressers
yeah.
as much as they happen, or they do at mine anyway, as much as they might happen in Parliament.
And I think there's a role to be had there as well in like modeling disagreeing, but not having a massive argument because they are, as you know, I was the same as a teenager. I had very strongly held opinions, and it was quite difficult sometimes for me to have sensible, rational conversations with somebody who I thought was just, you're an idiot and you're wrong and I can't possibly. And sometimes forcing them to just have an assigned perspective. Today, you are a Buddhist who is in favor of euthanasia. That's the perspective that you're arguing from. And it means that they can have a rational conversation without it descending into, you know, mudslinging and bickering.
And disagreeing
Yeah,
well is such a powerful,
yeah,
important, and it may feel at the moment one that we don't see modelled
yeah.
quite so well in public life.
Yes.
Better in your classroom than in public life.
Hopefully.
Um, So you were part of a Cullum St Gabriel's Masters Scholarship Programme for your 2 years. So you
Yeah.
got some funding
Yes.
towards your Masters. And as you've just mentioned, you were looking at debating an oracy and specifically how you use those to teach evaluation skills in RE. So can you tell us a little bit more specifically about what you found?
Yeah, so I was looking at the essay questions that you get in the AQA paper, which are basically just a statement and then evaluate this statement. And I realised that with incredibly little work on my part, you can turn all of those into a debate. Because one of the issues I was sometimes having with my students was that they would write a very good paragraph agreeing and a very good paragraph disagreeing, and there'd be absolutely no interaction between the two of them whatsoever. And I wanted them to get a little bit more engaged in that dialogue and that back and forth. And by turning those into a debate, there'll be lots of resources with this, I'm sure, to show how I did that, what the steps of a debate were, and some of the things I did to engage the rest of the class in that process, because obviously not everyone's speaking at once. But I found that they were much better able to have that backwards and forwards evaluation. You know, I asked students about what were the things to do with essay writing that they found difficult. And that was one of the things that came up, was that they just didn't really understand how to write an argument as opposed to just writing contrasting perspectives. And I interviewed, as part of that, teachers running debate programs about what they thought the benefits were. And there's this long-standing bit of anecdata that we all have, that, you know, debaters just write better essays. And I sort of wanted to prove if that was true. And if it was, then why are we not teaching all students to do that? You know, again, it goes back to what I said at the start about not wanting to see the ability to talk and the ability to argue as something that we have as an opt-in activity, particularly because schools quite often do it as an opt-in activity for their most able students. And actually, if this is something that's going to help everybody, then every student has an entitlement to that. It shouldn't be sort of gate kept behind certain GCSE predictions. You know, this is something that we should have for everybody. And I found that a lot of students were then more confident essay writing. Obviously, you can't use your students' GCSE results as data in an assignment. But what I found was a lot of them would come up to me after exams and tell me that they'd used some of the strategies that we'd discussed in lessons. So I'm, confident I've sort of sent them out as better essay writers and hopefully better small humans as well.
So your anecdata proved correct.
Yes, I think there's still a lot more research in that area, but I think that there's definitely some evidence now to support the idea that actually there is a crossover in skills between the two, and maybe if you teach them to do one, you can help them improve the other.
So finally, what strategies or steps or resources have you got that you can share so that others can learn from your research?
Yeah. So along with this chat, there's going to be an adapted version of my research poster, which has on it the steps to kind of setting up one of those debates in class. I've also then got a couple of different resources and some examples of those resources filled in. So one of them was a key skill in debating is rebuttal, which is replying to what the person before you has said. And we did a task where I got one student to do 3 arguments in favour and another student to then directly respond to this. So rather than it being 3 points for, 3 points against, it was 3 points for and then direct responses to all of those. So there's the blank version of that sheet and then a couple of examples. I also put together a sheet for students who weren't speaking in the debate to make notes of what both sides said and then write their own conclusion based on that. And again, there's a couple of examples of that. I also played around with a couple of different versions of essay planning to try and kind of bring those skills really into their essays. So again, there's a few examples of that. If you want Oracy strategies more generally that aren't quite so tied to, one specific GCSE spec, there's also some really fantastic stuff out there at the moment. So the Oracy Commission report came out a week after my assignment deadline, which I was not happy about. I even included it in there. I was like, this would be here. I promise I've not left it out because I've left it out. I've left it out because it doesn't exist yet. But that's really good, fantastic. There's also some subject-specific stuff. So I mentioned the St Andrews Ethics Cup. Just steal their format and do it anyway. I'm going to get my A-level students to do one on the applied ethics topics on the OCR A-level, just because I think it's really interesting to get them to talk. There's also the Philosophon, which if you've not run one in your school, I would really, really recommend. I did one with my school and then a school just down the road, and it was an absolutely fantastic day because then, again, it's not about being competitive, it's about having good philosophical discussions. And we had a full mix of kids from sixth form right down to our youngest, which are year 9, on teams together. And it was just brilliant. They were collaborating really well. And it was one of those ones where you've put lots of work into a day and then you go home at the end and you're like, that worked. That was worth the effort. So those are some subject specific things that are beyond just GCSE that I'd really advise looking into as well.
Brilliant. Beth, that's been really useful to see how practical your master's has been and how, frankly, lots of people can magpie lots of your ideas.
Yeah, please steal things. Take it all.
So thank you very much, Beth.